sorry. Thank you. So first request, please mute yourself. Because I will in fact mute everyone if that's okay. Because that's probably one of our first tips. Well, second tip now. Second tip, when you are hosting a virtual event, make sure that you as the host will ask the participants in the call to mute themselves so that you do not get the feedback as they join in. Likewise, as a participant in the call, we ask that you also mute yourself when you join the call to avoid interrupting the person who is presenting. Now, as I said, welcome everybody to this, what might be a first of a few series of how do we support our communities in running virtual events. I would like to acknowledge the effort and the enthusiasm of the people who have put their hand up or I have asked to present this afternoon about their experience in running virtual events. We've got a good wealth of expertise within our community, and I think within our MVP community, it would be great if we can share our experiences so that we can also empower our fellow community members to learn from what we do so that they can also support the communities that they work with. So just a slight change to our list of speakers this afternoon. We were supposed to have 5, but one of our speakers does not feel well. So we will only have 4 speakers this afternoon, but we will try to cover some of the topics that we have promised that we are going to cover. At the end of this call, I will be sharing a link to a survey to ask you to give us your feedback about what you thought about the call this afternoon and what other topics you would like to be covered in future events. So I might hand over to Darrell Webster, who is one of our Office apps and services MVP based in New Zealand. Most people would know him as Darrell as a service. And this afternoon, he is providing us a service, talking to us about how do we even get started? So over to you, Darrell. I'm going to put myself on mute and I will leave the rest of the moderating to you.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for that introduction. And thanks to everyone who's joined from all different places. I have a welcome that tends to cross all time zones. I like to say good now to people because it covers anytime, anywhere, maybe on any device. So yeah, welcome everyone. We're trying to today help you as MVPs to think about how do we run user groups using an online format. And this is something that came out of a discussion we had in our virtual forum last time. We were talking about whether we should try and think about running user groups online, whether we do it in person or a combination of both. And we realized that there were a lot of people who ran user groups, but perhaps haven't yet looked at how you could run it as an online user group too, and how you might merge the two experiences together. So the format for today, we do have a few speakers that are going to cover at a very high level the life cycle of how you might start with getting yourself on that track of creating a tenant, getting yourself set up with Microsoft Teams, and a little more from there. So I am going to just share my screen as well to get something of an overview of what's going on. We do have Loryan Strant first up, who's going to cover off things about how to actually get this tenant that is available to all MVPs on this call, if you haven't already got that. Robert Crane's then going to cover off some key things around how to create the event and start to spread the word. So getting people along to that events that you might already have as part of your meetup and part of your user group, but how do you maybe attract some new people as well? Kirsty's quite experienced there too around running events and her user group online. So she's going to give us a few tips about how to facilitate that meeting and maybe even getting in early and trying to set up so that you're nice and comfortable before you start. And yeah, as we said earlier, Bex Jackson wasn't able to make it today. So we're probably going to tag team this topic and talk a little about how would you promote the event socially before, during, and after. Now, I've got a fortunate role here of, I guess, playing like I don't know how to get myself set up. I'm on the role here where I'm going to start asking questions of each of our presenters. I'm not going to interrupt them too much, but I hope to get it almost like an interview style. And as we go through each presenter, I'll also look for questions in the chat, and I'll try and pick out some of those to feed them to our presenters. So just checking here if we have got Loryan all lined up yet. Are you there, mate?
Yes, I am.
Great stuff. Feel free to share a screen and take over.
That I shall. Give me just a moment.
And this used to be quite a long experience. We'd have to fill things in while someone's clicking buttons, but it's so much faster with Teams. So I'm sure.
It is, but I was actually thinking that I missed a feature of Skype for Business yesterday, which is the ability to drag people into a meeting, like physically click, hold, and drag. So
yeah.
What I want to take you through is securing your tenant, keeping it safe and secure. I'm going to go through it step by step. Oh, baby. So step one, we can have lots of fun. And yeah, for some reason this got in my head and I just went with the whole theme. So I'm sorry you're stuck with it now. So in terms of, yes, and this is still on securing the event. So remember why you're doing this. So you are running a virtual meetup, you're running a user group. You've got to still make sure that it's fun, it's dynamic. So don't get too bogged down in the I must secure it this way, because at the end of the day, this tenant is different from a normal tenant. Part of the reason why is because the first step is get a dedicated tenant for your virtual meetup or your user group. Don't use your work tenant, don't use your personal tenant, don't use your MVP tenant if they're the same thing. Because the reality is that you will not always be affiliated with the user group. You might actually leave at some point. So if it's in your tenant, that's going to make it particularly sticky. And so, yeah, by having your own tenant, as in a dedicated tenant, that's going to be a lot easier for you to pass the reins on to somebody else. As well as that, in terms of like paying for that tenant, there was a thing on the call the other day where will Microsoft give this to us? They used to. I don't know why they don't anymore. I would say while Shiva has that fight for us, just go out and spend $5 a month on a license. It's really $60 a year. You can probably skim that into some sponsorship somewhere to cover costs, those kind of things, or just as I do, pay for it out of my own pocket, because at the end of the day, it's not worth my time to keep battling, and I'd rather just have the tenant and get on with it. So in terms of securing your tenant, as I said, this is not your average tenant. This is not business data. This is not mission critical. This is not, lots of secure information. So you want to keep it secure, but not too secure, because the more secure you make it, the less usable it actually becomes. So there's a balance to be traded off, and I'll take you through some of the settings shortly. Step 2, there's so much we can do. Yep, it's going to get in your heads for the rest of the day. It's in my head. So there's a lot of things inside of both the Microsoft 365 environment as well as Microsoft Teams itself. Don't try and do everything. Reason being is if you have not run a user group or a meetup online before, your requirements will change over time. Why is that? Because you will find better ways to do things as you go. You might try something one way and go, that didn't work. Let's change the format. Let's change the agenda. Let's try it this different way. Or maybe we found having chat available during the meeting was too distracting for the guest or those kind of things who was presenting. So just kind of tweak and adjust as you go. Experiment with different options. So a big thing is to make this clear to your attendees. Now, you might think, hang on a sec, Loryan, you're getting out of the realm of security. I'm actually not, because you need to know what you're doing and you need to know what works for you, because otherwise you'll go and create this wonderful little secure world that just doesn't work. And then you've got to change things and it's just going to be frustrating. However, what is going to be important is for you to familiarize yourself with the Office 365 and Teams admin options. Now, it's not to say that you need to be an expert and be able to go out and consult at this. At the end of the day, we have people like myself who live and breathe this stuff, as well as others that you can ask. We're a community. We're here to help each other, but get familiar with the options. The amount of times I go to customers who reckon they know everything about Teams, and all it takes is one question and I derail them. And this is very important because this is security stuff. People can do things in your tenant that you might not necessarily want them to. So you need to be very mindful of that. Step 3, it's just you and me. I didn't have anything to drink. I'm just in that kind of mode because I've been locked in the house for so long. Get another admin. Admin accounts do not cost you anything. So get another admin, use multi-factor authentication to secure your admin accounts, but don't really have more than 5 global admins. It's not recommended. But yeah, have a admin account into your tenant. As I said, that admin account does not need to consume a license. So don't think that if you've got a second person in your user group that you run that you want to have an admin account that you have to buy another license. They don't actually need to have one at all. When you use things, you use the desktop clients because there's a lot more you can do in terms of control. Again, from a security perspective, you actually have a better experience using the desktop client for some of these things than you do with the mobile, web. And also what you need to think about when bringing people into your tenant, because you want to create an environment for them. That's great, but do have a think about, are you just using this platform to actually host conversations and files and information, or is it just a place to host your meetings? Because the reality is, as many of us probably already experienced, you have to tenant switch. And if I'm tenant switching to a community that has comments from time to time, I'm probably not going to bother that much. So think about that, because that will help you potentially have a more secure platform because you're not getting people to come in as much. And on that note, again, think about what you're using this platform for. Is it an actual community, or is it just a once a month event that we're getting together on? Because for you to actually have that community, you need to invite guests in. Guests are virtual objects in your Azure Active Directory environment, and that is support for you to manage. And as Shiva knows all too well, people say, it didn't work with my Gmail, it didn't work with my Hotmail, with my Live ID, it didn't work with my work account. I can get in, but this doesn't work. And forgive me, I'm not mocking you. There are lots of legitimate issues. So you are going to be the first point to support those. So secure yourself and your mental well-being by not necessarily doing it if you don't need to, because it's appealing, but I don't want to get added to another tenant. And I'm sure plenty of other people will feel the same way. And last thing I would also say is to make that easier. Again, security is all, not just about, firewalls and other things. Security is about some of the softer perimeter things. Pay for a PSTN conference license. It is only about $5 a month. Again, a very small cost, but it means that some people can actually dial into the user group. Yes, you're wondering, why would you dial in when something's being presented? The reality is maybe they need to look at the screen here, but they also need to dial in from their phone because they're on a device that doesn't have audio or something like that, or the headset doesn't pair, something like that. So again, it will just give you less of a footprint, less of a surface that you have to support and secure if people are able to come in through that way. Step 4, I can give you more. Now, getting into the real setup of stuff. Channels. People love creating channels. Don't create channels unless you have a real need to. The more channels you have, the more confusing it is for people, especially when you create a channel and then decide later to rename the channel. This creates quite a mess, especially if you then go and delete channels, and it creates quite a frustrating experience for end users as well, because something looks different in one place versus over here, and it just gets confusing for you all over the place. And also, you need to choose what your members and guests can and can't do, which I'm about to take you through right now. So, member permissions. if you have a team set up for your user group or meetup with all these options selected, go outside and fall on your sword. No, that's a terrible thing to say. Slap your own wrist, I don't know. It is not a good thing. You should not be allowing members to create channels, to create private channels, to add tabs, those kind of things. This is, from a security perspective, you need to control this environment, because otherwise, if it is open slather like this particular one is, things will change. And also those last options about give members the option to edit and delete their messages. A lot of people get frustrated in the Microsoft tenant that they can't edit and delete their own messages. That's a by design feature, because you need to think about it. And if I say something rude, there needs to be a history of it. So from a security and compliance perspective, go through these particular options, and to be honest, uncheck most of them. In terms of guest permissions, if you do go down this path, definitely remove the ability for guests to go and create and update and delete channels. That is a very, 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 very bad thing if they can actually go in and do that. As well as that, you'll need to tweak your at mentions. Now, again, security, you're wondering, hang on a sec, this is more adoption, this is more usability. It's still security, because again, security is not all hard firewall rules, codes, those kind of things. It's also the soft settings. So things like at mentions, we want to kind of lock that down, because we don't want everybody to be at mentioning the team every single time they think of something. Same with creating tags, because again, they can create inappropriate tags like stupid poo-poo heads. I don't think we want that as a tag. And lastly, in terms of channel settings, so again, softer side of security, you can actually moderate channels. So you can have the general channel is actually where you choose to do your announcements, and other channels you can choose to moderate things. So you can actually say that no, not everybody can simply post into here, or some people can post into here. So again, you need to think about, are you running a community, or are you just running an event and a meetup? Because the more of this stuff you have turned on, the more things you need to worry about. So step 5. Did you know the time of the road? It just doesn't work. It never did in the song. It still doesn't in person. So as I was saying, choose if you're having a meeting or a live event. These are very big differences, because again, we have permissions. Like right now we're in a meeting, so people can be chatting. I'm choosing to ignore it. I have no idea what's being said. They could be saying, Loryan is a silly poo-poo head and speaks too fast. Also, what does this have to do with security? So choose your options wisely. But as I said, this is a learning process, so you will go through and change it. Don't try and over secure things straight away because it looks like it makes sense. Start easy and then kind of tweak and adjust as you go from there. From a security perspective, I'll call it security, not just shoddy product development. Stream doesn't allow guests to access content that they were actually in. So for example, Shiva is recording this session. Let's say through secure design, we can't actually access that recording. So Shiva will actually have to download it and share it. So again, think about where you're sharing this stuff. Are you sharing it from an account in the tenant? Are you sharing it from your OneDrive or somewhere else that people have access to? So just some final things in terms of securing and controlling your tenant settings. There is a meeting settings area and a meeting policy area. Meeting settings are tenant wide. Now, normally we would cover this off in a larger organization, but considering the organization is going to be comprised of one user, being yourself with your paid account, we don't have to worry about it. But do put in things like URLs in terms of like help URL. Hey, you don't need to have Teams installed to join this meeting, or click here to get support. Put in your meetup URL. Also, there's a lot of options that you can specify in terms of meeting settings, as well as when you actually go into the meeting itself. Or if you're going to run live events, there are options that you can select, both at a tenant level, not a huge amount, but also when you are scheduling the live event. So as I was saying, to make your environment secure, get your head around all these different features and options, so that you are familiar with what to do. So with that, any questions? I don't know if there's any in the chat. Oh, is there a lot?
There were a number of questions, but the helpful nature of MVPs, they were answering each other's questions in the chat, so that was really good. And good to see people using @mentions. Loryan, I just about wanted to take over screen sharing and share the system audio so I could play the song that you're referring to, but it would interrupt your talk.
No, I just want people to know to think it in their head now.
Of course.
That's bad enough.
Yeah. Now, I'll just quickly go back one step and point you all to, if you haven't taken advantage of your MVP benefits, when you sign into the MVP portal, use the MVP content menu, and you'll find down here in the Office 365 subscription area, the steps you can follow to pick up your MVP tenant. If you're a Office Apps and Services MVP, then there's your allocation of 5 E5 licenses, and for non-MVP, non-Office MVPs, then you get an 5 E3s. There is a few steps here to follow through to pick that subscription up. I remember still a few years back, Loryan did a good post on being mindful of the name that you give your tenant. So it is going to be something that'll be in the link. So if you're going to choose your tenant name, just give that some thought before you do. But yeah, I just thought I'd just quickly show that before we hand over to our next presenter, Robert Crane, who he's going to show us how to create that event. And actually, before we do cut over, there was a good question there. Do we really have to use Teams? No, you don't. Right. So we are just going through this as an example because it's available to you. But you're quite welcome to use any online facility that you want to present the content to an online audience.
I would say just quickly on that, you can use Zoom, you can use Hangouts, you can use House Party, you can use whatever you like. One thing that I would say though, that probably more so MVPs who are not necessarily Office apps and services and deal with this all the time, if you do run a Microsoft-based user group or meetup on non-Microsoft platform, just be mindful that makes our jobs a little bit harder, because what ends up happening is we'll say, blah, 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 yeah, Teams is really good. And then someone will say, yeah, but MVPs don't even use Teams for meetings. They use it on Zoom. So I'm not saying don't do it, just be mindful. If the feature is, or the features that you need are absolutely crucial that warrant you doing it, do it. But otherwise, I battle that because I have customers who are very cocksure of themselves and like to shoot down Microsoft at any opportunity they can. And if MVPs are using non-Microsoft stuff for Microsoft events, it just makes my job and other people's jobs just a little bit harder. So,
hey, Lauren, this is Neil Benson. I asked the question because I'm fascinated with all the steps we should take to secure a tenant and everything, but it seems to be that's needed because it's not quite the right tool for the job. It's a great collaboration tool inside an organization, but between people across organizations, it's missing a lot of features. And that's why we have to go through these lengths of using Power Automate to capture a Microsoft Forms Pro form and register people and put them in an Azure B2C group and then add them to Teams and lock it down.
Yeah.
Great stuff, Neil.
If I can just jump in, I mean, a very valid point. I think, as I said, it really depends whether you're running a community or an event. If you're running an event, then effectively you just go into, to be honest, you don't even need a dedicated tenant. Run it off your MVP tenant, run it off your work tenant. It's irrelevant. But yeah, go in, do the settings, and then host the event, and away you go. If you're running a community where you actually want vibrant conversations and those kind of things, then that's when you need to go those extra steps.
Yeah. We're going to do a deep dive
Darrell,
sort of level 2 stuff. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say we have a few more questions in the chat. If we could just help answer those before we move on to Robert, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
There was a question there about if you set up a tenant in your MVP O365 subscription and then lose your MVP status, can the tenant be transferred to another owner? Technically, you can just pay for the subscription. So you keep the tenant, but you lose, because the tenant is not an MVP tenant. You're actually getting an MVP license in the tenant. So when that license expires, you can continue paying for like what we call it now, Microsoft 365 Business. I don't know what the new names are. So you can just use that potentially. So yeah, you keep the tenant and keep it running.
Yeah. There's another question there from Rory. Do you need to import all your users in the meetup?
Depends if you want them to be guests in the tenant. As I said, if you want it to be a community. The reality is that Meetup already has a discussion board feature, and it has the ability for you to contact everyone. So if you want to use Teams and have all that collaboration type stuff like Darrell and I do with regarding 365, we have a dedicated tenant. We have 30 odd people in there. We actually use it as a team. Then it makes sense. For anything outside of that, just use the meetings functionality, and yeah, that way. Because I mean, what I've done for events that I've run that are online through Meetup is literally just create the meeting invite in Teams or the live event, copy the attendee URL, and stick it into the Meetup event for that month. And Kirsty can probably talk more about that because she does it more regularly.
Yeah, well, actually, Robert's going to cover off the creating the events and how to promote it. But just before we move on to that, we are going to do a level 2 session at another time, so we can get into some of those power user kind of ways of connecting things and automating. But go ahead, Rob. Thank you.
Okay, so hopefully you can now, when I select the desktop, see the screen. Can you see my screen? Just confirm that you can see and hear me, Darrell. That would be great.
Roger, Robert. I can see your screen.
Excellent, thanks. So what I want to cover quickly is how to basically set up a meeting so you can actually go out there and do what we're doing now. There are a number of different ways to skin a cat here, as there always is with Microsoft products. The option here that I'm going to quickly show you is you have the Teams client already on your desktop. You go into the calendar, and if this is set up, it will see your calendar, your events, the other thing that are happening in your personal calendar. And then up the top, we have this option to meet now, and we also have the new meeting. Now, if we look at the new meeting, there are actually 2 options there, schedule and live event. So to start off with, if you want to have an ad hoc meeting right here, right now, without sending an invite, basically all you need to do is punch the Meet Now button. You fill in the topic there and you just go in and you join. You are then in a meeting all by yourself, but the meeting obviously is happening. And you go up to the little link button here, you copy the link. And then what you can do basically is you can then paste that into an email. You can send it to people. So the HTML version looks nice like this. The non-HTML version is a bit gnarly, but again, that is the link that you would send out to have a meeting. Once we're having our meeting, we get the same facilities, we get recordings and so on. And that would be, again, typically if you're in a community, as Loryan talked about, and then we wanted to start that straight away, again, ad hoc meeting. Now, if you want to schedule a meeting into a time in the future, you would go into the schedule meeting option. Basically here we put in a topic. All right, so we're basically making a calendar invite here. My advice here would be is to go in and invite yourself and probably basically invite any other people who are going to be speakers to your event. You can then set the time, the date. Let me just set that maybe tomorrow so it doesn't start beeping at me. You can also go in here and set it to repeat. If you're doing a regular occurring meeting, then you may want to do that. My advice to you is not to do that because we find that group meetings generally change. If you want to and you have a community, as Loryan has pointed out, you can select a channel to meet in. So if you have a community and you are having a number of channels and you can actually have the meeting in there, that's where the chat will occur if you want to do that, but you don't necessarily have to do that. And then down here, you can put any details in there. Now, when I go send, that will send off the invite. It will put it into my calendar as you see here. So if I now go in and have a look at it, you will see that I am the only organizer. And here is, again, this link here for this actual scheduled Teams meeting. Now, what I can do again is I can right mouse click, copy that link. And then when I do, I'm back to this stage here where I have these things that I can send in an individual email if I want to people or post onto a particular website. You'll see over the top here, we can chat. This is basically the chat for the meeting, any files we want to share inside that meeting. some meeting notes, and also the Microsoft whiteboard, which we have as well. We can cancel the meeting, and we can also set the time zone. Now, you'll notice that we do have meeting options here. When we select that, that will pop open a website basically, and you'll see that we have an option to allow people to bypass the lobby. So we have this concept of a lobby where you can prevent people from coming in until you are ready. And again, who can potentially present. So if we're having a meeting like we're having now, basically everybody's more or less at the same level and can present on the meetings. You may not want to do that, and I will cover off the differences on that shortly. Now, the last option here that I will give you is a live event. Now, a live event is more about a presenter broadcasting to an audience and is typically limited to an audience just asking Q&A in a chat. Okay, so again, you go through a similar, whoops, taking the caps lock off. You go through a similar style of setting it up, putting the dates, locations, time zones, all that sort of stuff, and potentially inviting presenters. We go next, and now here's our option to invite people to people in groups, organisation. But if you're doing a user group with people outside your organisation, you probably want to go public. Now, when you do go public, what that means is you can provide that link on a website. People can join, and they can join so anonymously if they choose. So if they don't want to specify an email address, they can join anonymously, and they can do so in a browser as well if they want to do that. Now, the live event, you'll see that we have the ability here to control the recording, some captions. So if you do want to have the language translated into another language, you can do that on the fly as well. And we can also have an attendee engagement report. My advice is to make sure you tick the Q&A so people can interact with you. And then again, we just go in here and we schedule. That will schedule, again, our live event. You'll see that it puts it in there. Now, when it comes back to it, you'll see that we get a dedicated attendee link. So remember that at a live event, we typically have a difference between a presenter who is far more powerful in what they can do, and an attendee who is typically a producer. So again, what we would do is we would copy that link to the clipboard, put it in an email, send it off to somebody, or post it on basically a website. Now, the difference with a live meeting is that when you run the live meeting, the recording will automatically take place for you. It will stream that much like a DVR. So if someone comes in 5 minutes late, they can basically commence at the beginning of the meeting and move through it as well. So there are some differences around a live event versus the meeting that we are in. So once you've scheduled your meeting, you've got the URL, then basically this is the thing that I do personally myself. So what I would do is I would use a link shortening option like Bitly. I would go in and choose the link shortening of your choice. I would go in and create a shortened link here just to make it easier for people. So all you do basically in my case is go in here, you post in the Mega Teams link, and you would just go in here and then make this, you know, nice and easy. And then that would give it a shortened link that you could then directly share out with people on a website. Now, what I do is that to get people to attend, what I do is I create a Microsoft form here, which is again is part of your tenant. You'll see that I put the link to the Teams meeting there that I've created with Bitly, so people will actually click on it and join it if they want to, if they don't want to write it down. However, I do encourage them to put their name and their email address in there, so I capture those details. And then what I do is I use Power Automate to basically automate the process of registration. They get an email like you see here with the URL for that meeting. Plus, you'll see that I have a standard Bitly URL here, which actually points to an ICS file. Okay, so that ICS file, which is a calendar invite, is actually in my OneDrive for Business here. The name's always the same, so the link is always the same. So when people click on that in the email that is sent to them with Power Automate, they will get the appropriate ICS link for that meeting. The only thing I need to remember to do is that when I do create a meeting in Teams, you'll see that it creates it in my calendar automatically. All right, so then what I would do here to update that ICS file for the next month is basically go into the event that it has already in my calendar. I would select this option here to forward as an iCal. That will give me that ICS file, which I then put into OneDrive, which is at the end of the link that is made public that people can then access. Okay, so that's basically how I go about setting up a meeting, copying the URL, and then making it available to people. Now, you can send the invite, as you see here, directly out of your email if you're more comfortable with that. If you've got a distribution list, if you want to do blind CCs, you do have that option. You can also basically, in the Outlook calendar here, if you want, you can also join, or you can also basically create a Teams meeting inside your calendar as well, if you want to do that. So that is also available. And then what I basically do with the meetings that I run is I would write a blog post like this. So I run a monthly public webinar, which is a live event that anybody can attend. And what I do basically is that link there in the blog goes to the Microsoft form, which they complete. And I do have the details there, and it takes them through those sort of processes. So my experience and recommendation is that you just need to go into the Teams interface, set up a meeting, capture the URL. Now, remember, you need to determine whether you want to have a meeting immediately or you want to schedule a meeting like we're having now where everybody's at the same level, or you want to have a live event where basically you're the boss and everybody else is just able to type into chat. Once you've captured that, then you can send that out to people and they can click on the link and generally join it via simply clicking on it and going into a web browser. But what I do is I shorten the link for people, and then I also give them this ability to put in the information here in a form, and then that then points them to an ICS file, which is their calendar invite, make it nice and easy. All of that automation is done via Power Automate, which is also inside the tenant, pretty quick and easy, which hopefully we can look at during the part 2 of this. Now, the last little bit of tip that I will give you.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Could you just please speak a bit slower for our other participants in the call? Thank you.
Sure. So the basically, I'll just go over in the summary again. I'll slow myself down here. So what I do in summary is I fire up the desktop Teams client. I create the meeting. Once I've created the meeting, I capture the link, the URL for that meeting, which typically looks basically something like this.
I would then sharing the screen. We have
sorry.
not seen it in the meeting. That's all right.
That's all right. I overlooked that because I try again. Sorry. Thanks for that correction, Darrell. I'm glad all these mistakes are being recorded so I can review them later. So I capture the URL from the meeting. I then basically take that, which can look a bit untidy, I suppose. I would then take that into a shortener. In my case, I use Bitly to shorten the link and make it nice and easy for people to remember. I would then embed that into a Microsoft form, which is part of the environment that I get as an MVP. And they can fill in a form. I can capture their details there. When they fill in the form, I have an automation process built in Power Automate that will complete the registration, send them an email confirmation, and point them to a calendar invite file they can download, which I have stored in my OneDrive. And then I basically post that onto my blog website and send that out via social media. So that's a summary of the process, but it all starts back here in Teams. And as Loryan and others have mentioned, you do need to decide, do I want to have an immediate meeting? Do I want to have a meeting inside a channel? Do I want to have a live event, which is more about me speaking and others asking questions in a queue? Once you've worked that out, schedule the meeting and use the URL that is provided by that appointment and then send that out to your users. If you then want to do more and automate it, you can do that using tools like Power Automate, which are also part of your environment. So the last thing that I would recommend personally as a presenter who does this regularly is it's well worth having multiple monitors. So I'm presenting on the monitor that you see, but I'm looking at another monitor with Teams, and I do have a third monitor which has my OneNote notes on it as well. So more monitors are good. Most people will have at least two, but it does make life a lot easier because then I know that I can present the whole screen and not have to worry about hiding something in the meantime. So that's basically me done, Darrell. Are there any questions that I need to address?
I think Rob, because you've definitely showed us a lot of options there. What would be the top 5 steps? You don't have to show us on screen, but if I was just getting started and I wanted to share a online meeting for Teams and add that into my meetup, what would be the 5 steps that you'd take for just someone beginning?
So the first step would be to schedule a meeting. Okay, so you go into your calendar, into your Outlook, or into your Teams on the desktop and schedule a meeting. That will produce a URL, basically a meeting request URL. You would take that URL request and you could then send that to a group of people via email, probably is the most easy, or put it into a blog site or to a meetup location and let people know that they simply have to click on that, and then they can open their browser and view the meeting in the browser. The additional option I would make sure that you make attendees aware of, that I find many overlook, is to ensure that before the event commences, they make sure their microphone and also their speakers are working and they have a headset. So all of that sound is done beforehand, because as we know, there is a general 15 minutes of tech support that's generally required at the beginning of meetings when people can't get connected. So if you can document a standard process and troubleshooting for people so they know. Another tip that I have is one of the first slides that I present is the webinar has now commenced. Audio is being broadcast and so is whatever. If you are having issues, please type in the chat and we'll do what you can. So remember to try and get people to do all that troubleshooting beforehand just to cut down your tech support. But basically, in summary, Darrell, create a meeting, whichever way you're comfortable with, grab the URL, stick it into the meetup location and tell people they just need to click on it.
Brilliant. And I like the way that you gave us a couple of steps that we as attendees can prepare before we join and see online. It's a really good transition over to Kirsty McGrath, who's going to tell us about what she does to prepare as a presenter and a facilitator, and then how she runs the meeting. Are you ready for us there, Kirsty?
I am indeed. Thanks very much. So I've actually put on the Chinese subtitles, not sure whether this actually works for the audience to be able to help you and which is the best one. It's just the simplified at the moment, not the traditional. If you would like me to swap it over, I'm more than happy to do that for you. So one of the things when it comes to facilitating events, and just on the back of some of the information that's been supplied, let me just bring up, I actually use Meetup. Meetup kind of does it all sort of for me. It sends reminders, it catches the people, but it does not capture an email address to be able to help. With the new features they've brought out with COVID-19, it's actually dropped off being able to put a link inside where I've got the simplified bit.ly link. I actually had a new field that was for online events and I had to use the full actual link in there, but it is available now as part of Meetup. If you're wanting to use it, the subscription costs, there is subscription costs in regards to it, and you can run up to 3 groups. So I run 2 user groups a month. And I've been doing that for about 3.5 years. And it's been in the last 1.5 years that I've actually taken them virtual. So some of the things that I've actually learned, and with being a certified online learning facilitator with the Learning and Performance Institute in the UK, there's a lot of skills that kind of come with some of the virtual that cross over with being both a moderator, a facilitator, and a virtual trainer. In terms of some of the pre-meeting type things, look, there's lots of stuff that we do. And, you know, you can have a look at these. These presentations are actually supplied for you to be able to help you out. But really, make sure everything is prepared beforehand. Your presentations, including any speaker presentations, get them beforehand, because things go wrong where all of a sudden they can't present So you might want to do it for them. I always do that, prepare of any polls or quizzes and feedback forms you might have. I log in early, make sure my speaker is there and logged in early. A big one, restart your computer before you start to do a virtual event. Make sure, because sometimes we haven't restarted it for maybe a week or two and things can get sluggish and slow. So you need something that's going to be fast. Close down all those unnecessary screens, turn off notifications, don't have your resume up on the screen, something like that, or client confidential information, really important. Try and share your whole desktop and include that audio check, especially that checkbox. If you turn the audio on, it can make a real difference. I have a copy and paste of guidelines, which I'll show you in a minute. I turned on any of those closed captions. Now I'm using PowerPoint, so I can do it through PowerPoint, or I can actually do it through Teams, one or the other. So she's saying, I've got subtitles not really working. Do we need to change it to the traditional Chinese? Let's have a look. Let me show you. So in my presentation, as part of slideshow, I can actually come up the top here and go, which one's going to be the right one to actually work? Let me change it over to traditional, and I'm going to go back into presenter mode. Let's see. You can give me an idea. Now I can actually see that because, I've got multiple devices, and I'll show you a little bit about that in terms of being able to see it. And press record, it is really easy once you get started to forget to press record. Much easier if you go, I'm going to, edit this later on and cut out the bits you don't need. So my desktop setup, I have multiple screens. So you'll see here I've actually got 2 devices plus a screen so I can break out and have chat. Sometimes I've got content scripts that I might have, and I've also got my mobile phone connected so I can have a look and keep an eye across all of the screens to go, is it going really slow? Is there a lag? If the lag is like 15 seconds, you need to go, well, what does it look like for the other people for you? Okay, so PowerPoint might not be doing the best translation for you guys, so my apologies. Okay, we'll keep going. So I often like to be able to see what's going on. Good, especially when we've actually got a chat happening and Q&A happening. So when I get started and kick off, if I can, I welcome them individually as they come in. If you've got a lot of people, sometimes what I do, and depending what's going on, and you can pick and choose from these, I cut and paste actual pre-canned message around expectations in this session. So I just paste this in. What do they do around mute? Make sure that they fix the audio sessions. How do they engage with me on Q&A? When do they turn off mute? How do we engage in terms of social media? Tell them that's recorded, and you need to actually have that as part of your recording due to privacy laws. So you need to include it in. Really important that that's actually included. So how you do this, multitude of ways. Sometimes I have a PowerPoint presentation that's in show mode, and I have just some little pictures, and it kind of scrolls through and it tells them this stuff on maybe 2 or 3 slides, but they're just pictures and do this or do that. So I try and keep it simple. I do talk too fast, so I will try slow down a little more for the translation. How's that? Sometimes, if it's going to be a bit more, yeah, absolutely happy to share that. If it's going to be sort of virtual training type, sometimes we will do sessions that aren't just purely about presenting at someone. If it's interactive and they need to do exercises, maybe they want to follow along and you want them to do what you're doing, then you're going to need to help them to say, rather than unmuting themselves, say, are they done? Do you need to repeat a command? If you're going too fast, slow, don't do the opposite, because if you say too fast, if you're saying too slow, speed up, there's always someone that's going to have more skills than the other. I'm so pleased I'm entertaining everyone. Okay, quizzes or polls. Look, there are a lot of really good poll solutions that are out there. To be able to do a poll and be interactive through your session, we can lose people's concentration. It takes, basically, if you try and engage with them some way or another every 5 minutes, pre-can ideas around questions that you can ask your audience to bring them in. so that you can engage them. Because you think about all the times you've watched a video, those we can get distracted really fast. So how are you going to keep your audience engaged with you? So all really important components, and I'm just going to drop down the bottom. When would I do a quiz or poll? Really, it's often a tonality and a mood check. If you want to ask for any direction at the beginning maybe of the session for your Q&A to take it forward. SurveyMonkey can be a bit full on. A poll is something they can often do directly from their mobile, and it's a really quick little link that they can engage in terms of answering questions where they can see a response. You can have like competitions, so there's sometimes much better ways to do it. That's more of a good one for a feedback rather than the SurveyMonkey. So where we want to also provide a feedback, you might use some different technology rather than a quiz. You might then go to a proper Microsoft form for your feedback, different things that you might use for different components throughout your session. When I'm having that meeting, one, good to have a moderator that can actually help with questions. Not everyone is great at being able to speak and read and answer at the same time. It is a somewhat unique skill, and once you start going over a certain number of people, then you will need a moderator to be able to help and answer questions along the way. That same moderator may even be able to push out social media, photos, relevant information. Maybe it's on your Twitter account. Do you have a Twitter account that's very specific for your user groups? So I have one of those, which is where we kind of push out, the fun things we might be doing in the session. I will, type in chat, maybe check in throughout it, and really keep an eye out on your screens for any issues. For example, that we can't hear you, those kind of audio things. It's very easy to get distracted. So that's often why I have my mobile phone. It may be with me and I'll turn the audio on to go, can they hear me? And it's kind of muted. It's in my back pocket. It's really light. No one else can hear it, but I can. These are sometimes different techniques that I might use depending on the session. To close out a session, thank everyone for joining. And, I'll also put it in writing to be able to continue on. I advise wherever possible the date for the next month, when we're going to do it, and who the speaker is, if you've actually know them, because you want to try and generate excitement that they register for the next event. I'll advise wherever I'm going to put that presentation or recording. I personally use Sway, and then that Sway then gets pushed out on my social media and it gets dropped into the meeting, the actual meetup comments, so that they know where to go to get that presentation. Sometimes I'll do it beforehand, wherever I've got the presenter details, but usually it's after, because I also put a link to the recording so that they can go and see it, as well as the presentation, and push it out on social media. And then, of course, give them that link to the feedback form if you're needing it or you want direction for future. So there's different things and different reasons why we might actually sort of get engaged. To give you a bit of an idea in terms of some of the poll costs and plans, there are so many different ones out there. Be careful in terms of which one you actually subscribe to, because they all have quite different plans depending on what you're going to do, and the audience size is really important. So, for example, Poll Everywhere, it gives you a max audience size of 25 people. You start to go over, then you are up for a subscription cost. So that's where we'll often have sponsors. I always sort of take on those costs myself, and then I get sponsors to sort of support certain components, because you want to own ultimately the content that comes out of it. I've had instances where we can get sponsors and sometimes they create the meetup and they create the polls and pay, and then you don't have access to your own content. So just a word of warning at the very end. But happy to help anyone along the way. And if I have any questions, or if you've got some questions for me, Darrell, happy to answer.
There was some discussion around running polls within the session, and why not use SurveyMonkey? Why use some of these other other services. But I think you covered that as you were talking, that what you've been able to use one, let's say, Poll Anywhere, for example, or Poll Everywhere. It has a little more interaction, doesn't it? Those sorts of services, being able to get that feedback, even live feedback.
Live, yeah, showing them live and live Twitter and having that open and seeing questions and things, thanking people whilst you're part of the session, you know, kind of eggs maybe others on, keeping an eye out across multiple devices as you're doing your virtual training if you can, or your moderator who's keeping an eye out on it, you know, that all helps.
Yeah, I'll just get us back to having that all faces view. The other thing that I wanted to ask you too, Kirsty, was how hard is it to try and facilitate that session when you don't have a moderator or partner off to the side and you're trying to engage an online audience and an in-person audience?
It can be really challenging, and it depends on your skill sets too. And you'll soon fast find out whether you're able to cope with having multiple screens and PCs, and can you read, can you talk at the same time? If you can't, then absolutely make sure that you've got a couple of moderators, especially if you've got quite technical questions being asked. Who are the skills in the room in the virtual room to be able to answer those, because you may not be able to cover it in your session. I've been answering some questions along the way for people as part of presenting, but you know, we aren't all specialists in our areas, so and try and encourage other people to answer as well where possible.
Great, yeah, that's very true. That's the thing about having a meeting where you have people in person and you're also trying to think of your online audience. It's much like, forget user groups. Sometimes we have to run a meeting. We're going into a meeting room and we also have people online. So I think we all need to be mindful of the people that are joining remotely, engage them in that conversation, and have that participant list up so you can see, oh, who haven't I heard from lately? Yeah.
And it is quite different when we've got to do a hybrid, when we're in person and we're doing virtual. That it adds a lot more challenges. In fact, I'm actually loving the fact that I can either do one or the other rather than hybrid, and going to pure virtual makes it much easier. If you follow a bit of a script along, just be ready, write tech, and be prepared long beforehand. That hour beforehand, you are going to need time to have everything checked because things go wrong very easily.
Now, the next section that we have, where Bex was going to try and cover off promoting the events, whether it be Twitter beforehand, during and after. I think we all get the concept that when Rob said, grab the link, grab the event from Meetup, create a nice post, create a nice thumbnail, and get that content out there. Promote the blog post if you've created a blog post as a placeholder to say, come along to my events. What I would like to try and do is simulate live tweeting. I'm going to try and join from my mobile here. In a normal case, for those of you a bit new to using Teams in this way, if I'm in my own tenant and I join a meeting on my desktop, and I also open up Teams on my phone, I can join using companion device. And that allows me to join in two places at the same time. Now, I may be able to get that to work, but it's looking a little different here in the Microsoft environment. So I might join and you might see this disappear and then you'll see me from my mobile. So let's just see what we can do. Doesn't look like.
Another cool one I'll say as part of facilitating, guys, hardwire connection in. Try not to use Wi-Fi wherever you can. Make sure you get a good, solid connection for your meeting to run it. That's a big one I find I have to make sure I do.
I do have a question for Kirsty, Darrell, when he comes back from the internet.
I guess that doesn't work.
No.
Nice to know that Microsoft's environment's all nicely locked down.
That's right. Here's a question for our four presenters. Actually, I have two questions. My first question is, one of the benefits of the in-person event is the personal connection that happens naturally when you are, getting to know people and networking, and that is something that we cannot replace with technology. Do you have any tips or suggestions while we are all still in quarantine or in COVID situation, where we can still use technology to try to offer a substitute for the community to continue their relationships? That's my first question. And then after you answer, I will ask a second question.
Oh, very good. Remember last time on the last call that Shiva had a 4-point question. Exactly. Well done, Shiva. Such restraint. And I did manage to get that feature going, but let's just forget that and come back to another time.
So
what we did.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
go on.
I was just going to say on.
Darrell, go.
All right. The tip that we tried last time, and it worked quite well for the few people that joined me. Let's just go over here and just show my desktop very quickly. We're in our meeting. Double click to get that back. Right, so here we are, live meeting, and everyone's like, okay, great. We're going to go to breakout groups right now so we can have a few discussions. What I want you to do is go over to the team where we're having the meeting. We're going to go into the virtual forum where we're having that meeting, for example. And in the channel, let's just start a subject. Here's the breakout subject. The subject is blah. And let's start a meet now. And what happened last time we had the virtual forum was we had a few of those meetings going and people could jump between them. And so those are our little breakout groups that are virtual small discussion groups. I quite enjoyed my one last time. So I think that's one way to do it. But Rob, you tell us what you've got as an idea.
So I've got a couple of ideas. Firstly, I would suggest that because you're trying to replace a personal interaction, I would suggest that you nominate a person, whether it be yourself or someone else, to be a welcomer. That person would then make individual contact with new people that come into your group or enroll, and send them an email initially and see if they want to maybe have a Teams chat, a phone chat. And then you may also want to interact with them and sort of say, look, do we want to do a pretend practice Teams meeting so that they get feel for the technology? Again, that's obviously depends on the resources that you have. The second one I would suggest is to have a cheat sheet, and again, deliver that personally via a direct email or whatever, so that people can follow through and say that this is what I need to click, that is what I need to click, and so on. And the third option maybe is to record yourself doing a video, maybe inside Teams, welcoming people to your virtual event that you can then put on YouTube or share with them, that shows them how easy it is to join the meeting, or to give them a bit of a flavour of what it's like. So again, I think injecting your personality or your group's personality, the people part, into the technology is the solution to overcoming that disjoint that happens with technology.
From my perspective, the thing that I do is, one, get them to turn their video on. Two, go into chat and go, introduce yourself. Say, hi, I'm Kirsty from On Point Solutions. My role is, so you go, these are the things I would like to hear from you. You can put just what your questions are. You can do another copy and paste pre-canned. Your name, the organisation you work for, the role, and what you're looking forward to getting out of the session, or why you joined, so that you've got maybe potentially a talk point at some point. If you need to fill in a little bit extra, you can start to then connect to people and understand why they are there, because that's often that networking component that we miss out on when we're doing a face-to-face, that 10-15 minutes beforehand where you're having a chat with people and finding out who they are, where they're from, what are their challenges, and or do you need to be running sessions where it asks specifically that, and find out a bit more about people.
All right. Perhaps even as a combination of that too, if you're super organized, you might even set up some of those little groups beforehand, so that we have our main group where we're having our discussion, and then you can have your breakout groups that are hosted by 3 or 4 people to introduce them in. What was your second question, Shiva?
Well, before I ask my second question, I might add a suggestion or a tip as well, which we have been doing in the last 2-3 weeks since the MVP Summit, which is you can actually just organize a social event as using Teams. If you decide to use Teams as your main community, virtual community platform, you can say, on the Friday afternoon, we will just have a virtual bar where we can just talk about anything. So that's the social aspect of it. Or you can also say for the first 10 to 15 minutes, bring your drink and your own pizza, or bring your own chips. And then after the social aspect, then we will go into the series of presentations. So that's another way to integrate the social aspect of the community into the event. My second question is about the code of conduct. I'm hoping I want to. It's more of a, I guess, like I'd love to get your comments on or insights about. We're moving to in the next foreseeable future. We are going to be in a virtual environment. How do we transfer our code of conduct in the in-person event to the virtual community? What are some of the challenges? And tell us what you think.
I think I saw in Loryan's notes or presentation, there was a tip there about the code of conduct and using a tab within your team. Loryan, did you have some ideas around how to make that available to all of your user group team members?
Bloody double mute. I think it comes down to probably going back to that thing that I've said a few times in terms of, are you running a community or you're running a meetup? So if you're running just a meetup where it's an online event, then your code of conduct should exist in the meetup platform, or if you've got a website where you coordinate these things. Otherwise, if you are running a community and you're using Teams as a platform, then you can use a wiki tab inside of like the general channel. But something to be mindful of is that guests have the ability to edit pretty much any piece of content inside. So you actually might be better off creating like maybe a PDF and sticking it in there, and then adding the PDF as a tab. That way nobody can modify it and breach the code of conduct with the code of conduct.
Nice. But I think Shiva's point here is that it is still important, even though we have a virtual event, that we conduct ourselves in a way that is inclusive. It is a little harder to facilitate when you're in an online meeting because really only one person can talk. So in our online code of conduct, we do leave deliberate pauses for people to say something, and
So
that's
we don't
okay.
talk over Darrell at the same
No,
time.
that's right. Can you stop doing that, please? That's what we don't
And be
do.
careful of other people muting you, because if they've been given presenter rights, all of a sudden, and I've had it where I've had people all of a sudden muting me. And so, you know.
Oh, that is brilliant. That is awesome.
Sorry, Kirsty.
You're right.
I
That was
thought you were
Loryan, wasn't
asking me to do that, to demonstrate it.
Oh, no, Darrell, right.
It happens.
The worst thing you
So-
can actually do to go an extra level is actually remove people. Like I can remove Darrell right now.
Right. I know we can kick people out, which is good at the end when you don't want them to hear end of conversations. But what right do they have in your meeting can be so important. And yeah, they can kick you out of your own meeting, and they go, oh, this is really boring. I don't like her. Next minute you're kicked out of your own meeting.
Yeah. All right. Was there a third and a fourth question, Shiva?
Maybe a sixth and a seventh, eighth.
Well, there was
17.
a question about like from my colleague Christina, some people give the feedback that using Teams to run an event will not be smooth in some regions. And for example, in the US, there are several server centers there, and obviously we do have a couple here in Australia as well. What do we know about how the smoothness of the flow of the event?
There is one tip that you can give if people are having, personally, their experience might be sluggish, but everyone else, their video is fine. And what we're in the habit of doing is, oh, you're having a terrible experience. Let us all turn off our video. But you don't need to do that in Teams. If you hover over your Teams toolbar right now and use the ellipsis button, you'll find that you can turn off incoming video for you. So that'll help your experience be better, but everyone else who has better bandwidth or maybe a bit better than no bloody network, sorry, NBN, then you might still be able to leave your video on.
But I would say just one thing to jump to that point. Comparing the ratio of how many data centers we have for Microsoft Cloud Services versus the US is actually not really applicable, because you then need to compare the population size and how many users they have. So we do have 2 data centers here, which is ample given the amount of people that we have and the usage that we actually have. Whereas the US has, more data centers because there are 20 times the amount of people. What do they got? Close to something like that. The reality is that the Microsoft network is designed in a way that you will take the shortest path of egress to get onto the network, and it's actually designed to spread media in all different kinds of places. So if I am in, let's say I'm in the US because I am actually at MVP Summit and I'm presenting, but the meeting is hosted here, you'll be connecting at the closest point to the meeting and traversing Microsoft's backhaul network to get across it. So the meeting will actually be hosted in Australia because that's where my account is. I'll be connecting to the US end of Office 365, going through Microsoft's private network, so not actually over the internet at all, and connecting in, and you'll be connecting to just the Australian one. So the network is designed to handle the load incredibly well. As I say now, where we've had, like a 775% increase in service, and it's largely still going. If you are having network performance issues, I would most likely look at your connection, as Kirsty said before, things like hardwired connection. Look at your machine, what else it's doing at the time, whether you've got some antivirus that's spinning up or a process that's running or something that runs like that. Not saying that Teams is flawless, but given that there's, in Australia alone, hundreds of thousands of people using the service simultaneously, it's actually a good indication the service is performing well and not actually throttled.
We've had a question around working from home and the time that we actually run our sessions. For me personally, I have mine at lunchtime because the type of audience that I would often have, I'm in change and comms and training, and it was a very heavy female audience. So therefore, doing nighttime did not actually work. There were sporting children commitments, and so I flipped it over to lunchtime. And that actually worked really well for my user group. So it comes down to who's your audience. You just need to know your audience and, what's actually going to work. The current environment now, working from home, if they were going to attend straight from the city and coming after work, will they do it now when they're working from home? Who knows? We're in such, I think, muddy waters at the moment of knowing when it would be right.
What I would say is, to be honest, it's quite a juggle because right now it's 6:15 here. I've been working from home all day. I've been on calls all day, and I literally jumped from a company meeting onto this one, and I'm actually presenting at Teams Fest in 45 minutes. So you've got to make your balance with this kind of stuff. I think to Kirsty's point though, like with her user group running in the middle of the day, mine usually runs Wednesday 5:30 p.m. To be quite frank, I think none of it matters anymore. I don't think there's really any hard and fast rule because people are going to be with their kids during the day because they don't have anybody to look after them, so they might be more inclined to go to an evening one, or maybe that's when they're doing their work. So I think we're in a very big level of unknowns and no right ways at the moment.
Mm.
Sounds good. I'm just mindful of the time, and because on that note, that Loryan is actually going to be running off to another meeting in half an hour. I just want to say thank you so much to Darrell, Loryan, Robert, and Kirsty for being our guinea pigs for this. Really appreciate the effort that you've put into putting this together, and I hope that we could, we will hopefully identify our next steps based on.
Did she just mute herself?
She's got. Did you mute? hang on. I'll unmute her.
No, you can't unmute her.
It's April 1st. And so it's April Fools, and I am getting April Fooled. I have just dropped a link to the survey where we are hoping that everyone in this call could spend 3 minutes of their time to just answer some of the questions. We'd love to be able to invite you again.
You need to change the sharing permission.
Oh, okay. I will do that. Thank you. And yes, so that's where we're at this stage. Thank you, and I hope everyone stays well and that we are all here to support each other. And if you have any questions about what we're doing next, please feel free to contact me, and I will type the link again once I figure out how to actually make a link work. Thank you. and
I'll provide you a link to the presentation as well, Levis.
Great, thanks, Kirsty.
Thanks, everyone. GG.